over have questions about? One, 3, and 5, so we'll do those 3. And then I'll let you guys decide if we're going to do them algebraically by decimals by both or whatever. Because some of them is not algebraic. So for number 1, do we want to see how we would do that without Desmos, see it on Desmos, or both? Both. Okay. Number 3, same thing. Algebraically, Desmos, or both?
Algebraic.
Okay. For number 5, I was going to say, okay, either one. Okay, remember that we should be practicing using Desmos for all of these, as many as possible, as these are your mini SOLs, and it is slowly approaching, still don't know dates yet. For number 1, if we were just looking at this, to figure out if this is parallel, perpendicular, or neither, look at your slopes. If they're identical, exactly the same, both positive, both negative, and identical, they would be parallel, but they're not. Perpendicular, if they have the same numbers, but one is flipped and one is negative, negative reciprocals, those are perpendicular. Any other combination would be neither. So if they look the same, but are one's negative, one's positive, or if they're both flipped, but they're both positive or both negative, or if they don't look the same at all. Okay, I'll show that one in Desmos really quickly. Someone read off those 2 equations for me. Both.
Y equals negative 3/4 x plus 5. And then y equals 4/3 x minus 2.
So as we're looking at those 2, if I look at it like straight on, it does look like an X. But if I look at it kind of on the side where it crosses, it does make that T. And that's what we're focusing on. So it crosses, it makes that T, it would be perpendicular. Okay. Number 3, if we are solving this, you would try to isolate the absolute value first, subtract the 2, guys focus, divide everything by 4, and at this step, we cannot do anything else because we can't have an isolated absolute value that equals a negative. So no solution.
I knew something was wrong about that one.
So if you have more than that, erase the rest of that.
Why is it no solution?
You can't have isolated absolute values that equal a negative because absolute value is positive.
I thought absolute value was both positive and negative.
That's if we got a positive answer here, then we would drop the absolute value and set it equal to both. The equations can be equal to both, not the absolute value.
Okay.
If you had put this in Desmos, nothing would appear to show it's no solution. Other questions on that? To graph this, we have to solve it for y, get rid of x by subtracting. And divide everything by 3. And then graph that, start at your y-intercept, positive 2. Your slope is negative 2/3, so up 2, left 3 as many times as possible. And down 2, right 3 as many times as possible. And your line should look something like that. If you did that in Desmos, just type in the equation, you should be able to find your slope and y-intercept and then rewrite it to make sure you have the correct slope and y-intercept. Questions on that one? If you haven't already, take out your word problem notes that we were working on. The quiz originally was scheduled for today, but then I haven't seen you, so we finished the notes, review, XYZ. So that is now next class. Does anyone need another one? You got it. Regardless.
We're showing the maze.
We are starting. We are at last month we found that it was 15, so we're going to go to the length. Alright, so let's read. The length of a rectangle is 1 inch less than 3 times its width. If the perimeter of the rectangle is 54 inches, find the length. These are the problems that should be familiar because we did this before. Again, we didn't call it solving systems of equations, but we were basically doing substitution. What is important there? Yes.
But 2L plus 2W equals perimeter.
Say that one more time, please.
2L plus 2W equals perimeter.
Okay. That is important information that you have to know, but that's not given in the problem. We will write it down here in a moment, but what's important is what this times its width.
Or the length of the rectangle.
Yes, that entire sentence. The length of a rectangle is 1 inch less than 3 times its width. Yep. What else?
Of the perimeter of the rectangle is 54 inches.
So, because it's talking about length and width, those would be our two variables, L and W. If you want to be more specific, you could say in inches, but just length and width for this one. I'm going to put in general the equation for the perimeter, and then we'll fix it so that it works with our problem. So P equals 2L plus 2W. That's our equation in general. Specifically, since we know the perimeter is 54, we can change that P to be 54. How would we set up that first part? The length of a rectangle is 1 inch less than 3 times the width. Talking about the length, so we know it's going to be at L equals 3W. Yes. 3W minus 1. So that 1 less than, that would go at the end. And then 3 times its width. So 3W minus 1. Right. As I mentioned earlier, and we can see this is solved for L, so this is a really good substitution problem, which is what we were doing back when. And then we can distribute and solve for W and then go back and find L. So in this one we'll have to solve for W and then go back and find L, but the previous ones we were finding the one specifically, but that's okay. So the width would be what? 7 what?
7 inches.
Inches. Notice that that's up here, so that's not our answer. So then it would have to be 20, but still do the work to get the rest of that. And L is 20. And then we will finish this when we get back to work. Minimum 1 or max 2. Okay. So for this one, Ariana's English test has 2 types of questions. Multiple choice worth 2 points each and short response worth 3 points each. And there are 43 total questions and the test is worth 100 points. How many short response questions are there? So we need important things first.
Multiple choices 2 points each, and short responses 3. And 43 total questions. The test is 100 points. And then how many short responses?
So 2 variables, what do we want to call them?
S and M.
SM, you can use CR, it doesn't matter. You can put them both if you really want. I don't know why I wrote it that way. What would these 2 variables represent?
Short question, short answer question.
What about them?
Oh, their word.
So we know their worth. What else don't we know? We know how much a multiple choice is worth. But what is the question asking? What don't we know? How many of each there are. So number of multiple choice, number of short response. And then we have 4 numbers. How would we set this equation up? These equations up. Let's go back here.
I think the answer is 43.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Plus, I think you guys are having the same idea. And that's not what we're going to say. So combining all of your ideas, putting those together, yes, 2M and 3S, and it would have to equal the 100 points. Because if I knew how many questions there were, and I multiplied it by its worth, I would get the total points. What would the equation that equals 43 be? Go ahead. Go ahead. Happen. Okay. Alright, do we want to solve this by substitution? I don't know if we did graphing in here, but if we want to see it by graphing, that's fine. Graphing substitution or elimination. Substitution. Okay. We are looking for short response. So if we solve this for M and we substitute it back in, then we'll end up with S. So get rid of S. And then take that and put it back into the other one. Where N is. So 2 times 43 minus S plus 3S equals 100. And distribute and combine like terms, solve for S. S is, and this would be questions. We know we can't go backwards, so it's not going to be 10 or 16 or 18 or 7. But for the problem, Ben and Landon took turns driving on their recent 820-mile road trip. Ben averaged 60 miles per hour, while Landon averaged 56 miles per hour. If the trip took them 14 hours, how many hours did Landon drive? What's important there?
Ben and Landon took turns driving on their recent 820 miles road trip.
Really just the 820-mile road trip.
And the 60
that
miles
hard?
per hour.
Ben averaged 60 miles per hour.
Landon averaged 56.
Landon averaged 56. 14. This trip took them 14. And we're looking for
How many hours did Landon drive?
how many hours did Landon drive. Alright. So our variables, what are we going to call those?
B and L.
Short. I'm going to make them capital B and L.
By and large.
And what do these variables represent?
Hours.
Hours. Hours each one drove, or number of hours each one drove. They switched where the total was, so be careful when we set up these two equations. What would the equations look like here?
B plus L equals 14.
That's going to be one of them. So the number of hours Ben drove and the number of hours Landon drove would equal the total number of hours they both drove.
60B
Plus
56
equals
820.
Right. Do we want to solve this by substitution, elimination, or graphing?
Substitution.
Okay. We are trying to figure out how many hours Landon drove, so get rid of L. If while you're doing this you solve for the wrong thing, so let's say we are trying to get L at the end, but you solve for L. When you substitute in, you'll be left with the opposite variable,
Oh,
and then you have to solve for that variable, and then go back and solve for the other one. It doesn't matter, but this just makes your life a little bit easier. That way you don't have to double solve. Okay, put that in for B. And solve. You'll have to tell me what some of these numbers are. What's the name? So the number of hours he drove is
5.
And then, like I said earlier, this can only go one direction, and this can only go one direction. So without solving the last two, we missed it.
I solved them. The answers are correct.
Good. So then, for the remainder of class, you guys can be working on the problems we didn't, your Delta Math, for this that's due on Friday. I'm going to pass out a review that we're going to go over questions before lunch, and then you guys will take your quiz after lunch, so you can be working on that. Missing Delta Math from this unit, so elimination from last week, substitution and graphing from 2 weeks ago, or none of you are missing tests, but if there's retake work that you need to do, remember that Wednesday, tomorrow, is the last day to do missing assignments from marking period 2 and retake work. Thursday is the last day to retake as long as everything is done by tomorrow. So you'll be working on any of those things I'll pass with the review. If you want to do retake work, you can come see me for those. Use this time wisely, you can work together.
I'm going to do the review for the nothing else to do.